7:30 in the evening across India. I am Tanvi Taneja, live from New Delhi. You're watching DD India Global. We'll bring you the day's big stories from across India and the world. My colleague Nick Harper is joining me from Washington, D.C. Nick, namaste.
Morning, Tanvi. It's 9 a.m. here in Washington, D.C. It's 3 in the afternoon across Central Europe. Coming up in the next 30 minutes, there are more criminal charges against President Joe Biden's son. We've got all the details. And China and the European Union sit down for talks, the first in 4 years. That's coming up. But first, the headlines.
Benjamin Netanyahu attends funeral of Israeli war cabinet minister's son killed in combat. UK's Foreign Secretary calls to plan for Gaza's future post the Israel-Hamas conflict.
We stand up a plan for what happens after this operation is over and how we map out a future to a secure future for both Israel and for the Palestinian people.
Russian President Vladimir Putin vows to run for president again in the 2024 presidential election. The new term would keep him in power at least until 2030. The oil-rich Essequibo border dispute between neighbors Guyana and Venezuela worries Brazil President Lula da Silva says we don't need war in South America. And Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi inaugurates Confluence of Art, Architecture and Design at the Biennale 2023 in New Delhi's iconic Red Fort. First news of the Israel-Hamas conflict. As Israel sharply ramps up strikes against Hamas, Israeli military claimed that 92 of its troops have been killed in Gaza since their ground operations began on October 20th. On Friday, a funeral was held for the son of an Israeli cabinet minister who was killed in northern Gaza. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu was among the dignitaries who attended the funeral of the former military chief, Gadi Eisenkot's son. While stressing on the need to chart out a future plan for Gaza, UK Foreign Secretary David Cameron said that a two-state solution can never be possible with Hamas being in charge of the Palestinian enclave.
The D bit of FCDO, the development part, is going to be every bit as important, and it's the same in America. We're going to have to try and work out how to build up the Palestinian Authority and revitalize it. We're going to have to work out how to engage the Arab states, how to try and rebuild what the Palestinians have and what they need.
In a joint press briefing with Cameron, US Secretary of State Antony Blinken said that there remains a gap between Israel's intent to protect civilians and the results on the ground in Gaza.
Been evacuating neighborhoods instead of entire cities, so focusing in on a much more deliberate way on those who may be in harm's way as they conduct the campaign against Hamas, establishing some deconfliction areas, some safe areas that people can go to, where they can be safe from being in the line of fire. It is imperative, it remains imperative, that Israel put a premium on civilian protection. And there does remain a gap between exactly what I said when I was there, the intent to protect civilians, and the actual results that we're seeing on the ground.
Now, between all this, the United Arab Emirates has asked for the UN Security Council to vote on a draft resolution that demands an immediate humanitarian ceasefire in the conflict between Israel and Hamas. To be adopted, a resolution needs at least 9 votes in favour and no vetoes by the 5 permanent members. DD India's Jody Jacobs reports from New York.
The UN Security Council is set to meet on Friday to debate and then vote on this latest draft resolution by the UAE. But there might be some pushback, especially from the US as a permanent member who also holds veto powers. Speaking to reporters here at the UN in New York, the Deputy US UN Ambassador Robert Hood said that the US does not support any further action by the Security Council at this time. This said the diplomatic stakes are high for the US should it veto this ceasefire resolution. Calls are mounting for urgent action, with the EU saying that the UN must act immediately to prevent a full collapse of the humanitarian situation, while the WHO has warned that Gaza's health system was near total collapse. In a rare move on Wednesday, Secretary General Antonio Guterres formally warned the Security Council of a global threat from the Gaza war. He invoked Article 99, which allows the Secretary General to bring to the attention of the Security Council any matter which in his opinion may threaten the maintenance of international peace and security. While the Arab countries support this move by the Secretary General, the Israeli ambassador to the UN has once again lambasted Antonio Guterres. He says that the Secretary General has reached a new moral low and has once again called on him to resign. The UAE's draft resolution has been sent to Council members ahead of Friday's vote. To be adopted, a resolution needs at least 9 votes in favour and no vetoes from any of the permanent 5 members. Friday's Security Council meeting will be a defining one as the UN's humanitarian chief continues to sound the alarm bell. He has told journalists that the UN's humanitarian plan to protect civilians in Gaza is in tatters and there is no place that's safe anymore. Jody Jacobs at the United Nations in New York, reporting for DD India.
Moving on now, just as re-election bids of US President Joe Biden and his Republican competitor Donald Trump seem uncertain for now, continents away, Russian president is certain that he will run for president in the upcoming March election. My colleague Nick Harper is in Washington, D.C. He gives us more on this and other stories making news around the world. Nick, quite expected there, Putin running for the 5th term as president now.
That's right, Tanvi, no real surprise. Ending speculation, Russian President Vladimir Putin has said he will run for president again in the 2024 presidential elections. In a military ceremony where he was awarding soldiers who'd fought in Ukraine, Putin was asked if he would run again, to which he said yes. Putin has served as president longer than any other ruler in Russia. If Putin is re-elected, he'll remain in power until 2030. For more on this, DD India's Dasha Chunashova is live for us in Moscow. Dasha, President Putin's announcement was expected. What's been the reaction so far to the news in Moscow?
Well, indeed, this announcement was widely expected, particularly since the Federation Council has confirmed and set the date for the presidential election much before the anticipated time. So we understand that the election is now to be held on the 17th of March, but it will also last for 3 days from the 15th to the 17th. As for the reaction, we have heard the Russian politicians all saying that the Russian society is as united around Putin's government as never before. If you look at the approval ratings of the Russian president, he do say that they are as high as never before. They range between 75% and exceed 80% in different weeks. And certainly the Russians do appear to be in trust to the Russian president. But at the same time, we also understand that the Russian president has made this announcement in a way that is appealing to many who do support the so-called special military operation in Ukraine that was held, that was made at the ceremony when the Russian president was awarding the military awards to the fighters of the special military operation. And he was asked whether he would run, and he said that he at different times had different thoughts. We also have heard the Kremlin saying that the electoral campaign and the announcement by the Russian president will certainly be met differently in the media in different parts of the globe. But at the same time, Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov also said that Russia and Putin have started the process of tectonic shifts, particularly when it comes to the world order and everything that is happening in Russia, meaning the economic reforms and the economic changes that the country is undergoing. So generally, the perception here is quite welcome, and it is expected indeed that the Russian president will start his presidential campaign right away.
And is the expectation that President Putin will win again? I mean, are we seeing any real challenge from other politicians?
Well, indeed, we're yet to hear the announcement of other candidates from other parties that are parts of the Russian State Duma. There hasn't been any announcement so far, but at the same time, we have heard from 2 independent candidates that they would like to join the presidential race. Speaking about the opposition that used to participate in previous presidential elections in Russia, we understand that at the moment there are no real candidates from them, because much of those people are now either in jail or left Russia after 2022. And another contender, for instance, the possible presidential candidate Igor Girkin, who used to run the pro-national Telegram channel and was quite influential in several circles, he was also imprisoned. His sentence, not the sentence, but his time in jail has been extended for yet another 6 months, right on the day that the Federation Council has announced the date of the presidential election. So it's very difficult to see what other candidates could be actually challenging the Russian president. So the understanding is that indeed the incumbent President Putin will be winning the presidential race, but at the same time we do understand that several other candidates will be introduced by the major parties of the Russian parliament.
Dasha, thank you. That was Dasha Chernyshova live for us in Moscow. Well, next today, the Kremlin has said it is unrealistic that Russia would engage in peace talks with Ukraine on Kiev's terms in 2024. It was responding to a media report which said Washington wanted such a scenario to unfold between Russia and Ukraine. It comes a day after the Kremlin accused the White House of demonizing Russia. It added that if Washington stops backing Kiev, all other Western countries will also turn away from it. Russian missiles struck Ukraine's Kharkiv region, damaging cars and apartment buildings. The attack also left 2 people injured. The explosion damaged at least 7 apartment blocks and more than 20 cars, as stated by Ukraine's state emergency services. Turning to news in the US now, and US President Joe Biden's son, Hunter Biden, has been accused of tax evasion. The Department of Justice filed new criminal charges against Hunter, accusing him of failing to pay $1.4 million in taxes, in an indictment which includes 3 felony and 6 misdemeanor tax offences. He faces up to 17 years in prison if convicted. The US House of Representatives took a step towards an impeachment probe into President Joe Biden on Thursday. They accuse him of taking advantage of his position when he was vice president to benefit his family, and say the Department of Justice interfered in an investigation into his son Hunter. DD India's Caroline Malone reports from Washington.
Presidents have been impeached by the House in the country's history, including former President Donald Trump. Now the House Republicans want to move forward to formally investigate the current leader, Joe Biden. Well, the former House Speaker, Kevin McCarthy, actually opened an inquiry on September 12th after months of congressional investigations. That's the first formal step in the process. Then there's a procedural step. That happened Thursday, where the House introduced a 14-page resolution that allows them to go on to then vote on authorizing the probe. As for when that could happen, it could happen as early as next week. Since September, the House Oversight Committee has had 1 public hearing. They've interviewed several officials. They've issued subpoenas for Biden's family financial records and for testimony from family members, including Biden's son Hunter. Next week, on Wednesday, December the 13th, the House Committee have called for Hunter to appear in a closed-door session to give testimony. His lawyers say he will appear if it's a public hearing, but not behind closed doors, as there's a risk of them not accurately portraying what he's actually said. The House Committee has threatened to hold him in contempt of Congress if he doesn't appear. Crucially, though, they've not presented any evidence that Biden's actions when he was vice president are in any way connected to his son's businesses, the premise, of this impeachment inquiry. And even if they did and the House voted to impeach him, the Senate would likely not, because there is a slim Democratic Party majority. Caroline Malone in Washington for DD India.
Leaders of China and the European Union have wrapped up their summit in Beijing. It's the first time that they've met in person in 4 years for talks. President Xi Jinping met the President of the European Commission, Ursula von der Leyen, and the President of the European Council, Charles Michel. DD India's Andrew Wood reports from Hong Kong.
Well, this was the first time the leaders of the European Union and China have met in person since 2019, before the COVID pandemic started. There was a summit about a year ago, but that was held by video link. So this was a chance for both sides in Beijing to get together and raise some of the issues that are troubling both sides. Now, some of them were, for example, the European Union is worried about China is not perhaps taking Russia to task for its invasion of Ukraine. The Chinese said, though, that Russia is a sovereign country and it can't interfere in Russia's affairs. There were issues too over trade. At the moment, China is the EU's biggest trading partner. Now, there's also a big imbalance. China exports $200 billion more of goods and services to the European Union than it buys from the European Union. And the European Union also has to balance trying to do more trade, improving links and so on with China economically, with the desire for certainly big companies to try to find alternatives to supply chains that reach deep into China. Now, for their part, the Chinese are also upset, or they don't like investigations by the European Union into its electric vehicle industry. The European Union says that China is, alleges that China is giving illegal subsidies to its EV industry, and there's a similar investigation coming up for China's steel industry. I think China says that it wants to be friends with the European Union, that it's possible to be rivals and be in competition without confronting each other. But as I say, this didn't really provoke. This meeting didn't really produce a meeting of minds. It was good that the two sides talked to each other. But with issues like the Russian invasion of Ukraine, the two sides are obviously have very different ideas about that. That there wasn't, as I say, that meeting of minds. In Hong Kong, I'm Andrew Wood reporting for DD India.
Well, that's it from me here in Washington. Tanvi, back to you in the studio.
Thank you, Nick. Have a great weekend there. Nick Harper joining us from Washington, D.C. Still to come on DD India Global. With 5 days left to address the future role of fossil fuels, COP28 president tells nations to get out of their comfort zones and finalize the deal. India's opposition lawmaker Mahua Moitra expelled from the lower house after a panel finds her guilty of accepting gifts from a businessman to further his interest. We just don't bring you the news as it unfolds. We get to the heart of the matter.
We don't just present facts. We demystify complex social, political and economic events.
We break stories that shape the world's present and future because you deserve the truth.
I am Tanvi Taneja from New Delhi.
I'm Ollie Barrett from London.
I'm Nick Harper from Washington, D.C.
Join us on DD India Global Monday to Friday at these times. Now news from New Delhi. Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi inaugurated the first India Art, Architecture and Design Biennale at New Delhi's iconic Red Fort. The week-long Biennale is being organized by the Indian Ministry of Culture. It is a confluence of modern and ancient art, architecture and design from across the country. Prime Minister Modi released commemorative postage stamps at the event, and he also unveiled 7 research publications. Addressing the gathering, the Prime Minister stressed that art, architecture and culture only flourish when people have the freedom to express themselves.
आर्ट, आर्किटेक्चर और कल्चर तभी फलते फूलते हैं जब समाज में विचारों की स्वतंत्रता होती है, अपने ढंग से काम करने की आजादी मिलती है। डिबेट और डायलॉग की इस परंपरा से डाइवर्सिटी अपने आप पनपती है। इसलिए आज भी हमारी सरकार जब कल्चर की बात करती है तो हम हर तरह की विविधता का स्वागत भी करते हैं, उसे सपोर्ट भी करते हैं। देश के अलग अलग राज्यों और शहरों में G20 के आयोजन के जरिए हमने अपनी इस विविधता को दुनिया के सामने शोकेस किया है।
Prime Minister Modi also launched the Atmanirbhar Bharat Centre for Design at the India Art, Architecture and Design Biennale. PM Modi said that this centre will give a platform to the unique and rare arts and crafts of India.
ये सेंटर भारत की यूनिक और रेयर क्राफ्ट्स को, दुर्लभ कलाओं को आगे बढ़ाने के लिए मंच देगा। ये कारीगरों और डिजाइनर्स को साथ लाने, मार्केट से इसे उन्हें इनोवेशन करने में मदद करेगा। इससे कारीगरों को डिजाइन डेवलपमेंट की भी जानकारी मिलेगी और वो डिजिटल मार्केटिंग में भी पारंगत होंगे। और हम जानते हैं भारतीय शिल्पियों में इतनी प्रतिभा है कि आधुनिक जानकारी और संसाधनों के साथ वो पूरी दुनिया में अपनी छाप छोड़ सकते हैं।
Inaugurating the Uttarakhand Global Investors Summit in the country's northern state today, Prime Minister Narendra Modi said that India is all set to become the third largest economy of the world. He also unveiled the House of Himalayas brand at the event. DD India's Vishal Baristo reports from Dehradun.
The Indian state of Uttarakhand is holding a two-day Global Investors Summit. Inaugurating the summit, the Indian Prime Minister said that the mission of his government is to provide global branding for the village products. The House of Himalayas is an umbrella that would provide branding and marketing of the local products at the world stage.
साथियों, मैं आज उत्तराखंड सरकार को हाउस ऑफ हिमालय ब्रांड लॉन्च करने के लिए बहुत-बहुत बधाई देता हूं। ये उत्तराखंड के लोकल उत्पादों को विदेशी बाजारों में स्थापित करने के लिए बहुत अभिनव प्रयास है। ये हमारी वोकल फॉर लोकल और लोकल फॉर ग्लोबल की अवधारणा को और मजबूत करता है।
The Indian Prime Minister appealed to the billionaires of the country not to move abroad, but turn to this Himalayan state for destination weddings.
हमारे यहाँ माना जाता है, कहा जाता है, जो शादी होती है ना, वो जोड़े ईश्वर बनाता है। ईश्वर तय करता है जोड़ा। मैं समझ नहीं पा रहा हूँ, जोड़े जब ईश्वर बना रहा है, तो जोड़ा अपने जीवन की यात्रा उस ईश्वर के चरणों में आने के बजाय विदेश में जाकर के क्यों करता है?
Indian big brands like Adani, Jindal, Patanjali and TVS Group assured their commitment for investment in this Himalayan state in the field of energy, infrastructure, tourism and health.
After the pandemic, the world is looking at India with a lot of hope, said the Indian Prime Minister by inaugurating the Uttarakhand Global Investors Meet, which has a theme, Peace to Prosperity. Prime Minister Modi asked the entrepreneurs to develop a supply chain so that India is not dependent on any other country. With cameraman Alok Gupta in Dehradun, this is Vishal Baristo for DD India.
More from India. On the fifth day of Indian Parliament's winter session, MP Mahua Moitra was expelled from the lower house in cash for query matter. The Lok Sabha adopted the Ethics Committee report on Trinamool Congress MP Mahua Moitra. In the upper house, the private member's legislative business was taken. Now, just 5 days left for the COP28 summit to conclude in Dubai. Sultan Al Jaber, president of this year's summit, urged countries to step out of their comfort zones and work together to reach an agreement towards climate action. As the conference ends on December 12th, the countries are engaging in wide-ranging talks to arrive at a common agenda to tackle climate change.
I need you to step up, and I need you to come out of your comfort zones. And I kindly ask you all to be flexible and to truly and genuinely engage in our deliberations and discussions.
On to South America now. As tension mounts between Venezuela and Guyana over the oil-rich Essequibo region, the matter is likely to be taken up by the United Nations Security Council in the upcoming sessions. We have a report.
Tension mounts in the South American region as conflict between Guyana and Venezuela intensifies. In a recent move, Venezuela's President Nicolás Maduro raised the stakes in the country's border dispute with the neighbor. Maduro ordered state companies to exploit contested oil and mineral deposits in the Essequibo region and redrawing official maps after claiming an overwhelming mandate in a referendum last Sunday. Responding to which, Guyanese president said earlier this week that his country's defense force was on high alert and promised to refer the matter to the UN Security Council. He said Venezuela has clearly declared itself an outlaw nation.
President Maduro announced several measures which his government intends to take in enforcing the outcome of the referendum held on December 3rd, 2023. As I made clear from the date the referendum was first announced, this is a direct threat to Guyana's territorial integrity, sovereignty, and political independence.
Brazil is closely following the developments in the neighborhood. President Lula da Silva suggested at a Mercosur summit that multilateral bodies such as ECLAC and UNASUR should contribute to a peaceful solution. We do not want and we do not need war in South America. Britain too called out to Venezuela to cease unilateral action. Meanwhile, the White House on Thursday reiterated the United States' unwavering support for Guyana's sovereignty. The long-running spat over the oil-rich Essequibo region, which is being heard by the International Court of Justice, escalated over the weekend when voters in Venezuela rejected the ICJ's jurisdiction and backed the creation of a new Venezuelan state. Maduro's aggressive speeches have alarmed Guyana and sparked fears that Venezuela might use force to seize the remote Essequibo area. The area accounts for 2/3 of Guyana's territory and has a big offshore oil field operated by US oil major ExxonMobil. Amit Mukherjee for DD India.
And now we take a look at other stories making news around the world. Taiwan's defense ministry said in a statement that 12 Chinese fighter jets and a suspected weather balloon had crossed the Taiwan Strait's sensitive median line. The tension comes amidst Taiwan's January 13th presidential elections. The Duke of Sussex, Prince Harry, has lost an attempt to strike out the Mail on Sunday's defence to his libel claim against the paper over its reporting of his dispute with the Home Office over his security arrangements. Prince Harry's case against associated newspapers will now proceed to trial as per London High Court's ruling. And French President Emmanuel Macron visited the Notre Dame Cathedral on Friday, 1 year before its scheduled reopening in 2024. After a blaze burned through the roof and spire in April 2019, Macron's visits have become a tradition, with Friday marking his 6th to highlight the rebuilding progress. And as the Christmas festival is coming up, the largest Christmas tree in the world was lit up in the medieval Italian town of Gubbio. As per tradition, the entire slope of Mount Ingino has been lit up with bright lights in the shape of a Christmas tree. So that's all in this edition of DD India Global. Do let us know your thoughts on the news of the day. Connect with us on Facebook, X and Instagram at DD India Live. You can also find us online on YouTube at DD India Live. We will be back with more news as it breaks here on DD India. I'm Tanvi Taneja from my entire team in New Delhi. Thank you for watching. Namaskar.